How do organizations decide which project to run next? Before you even attempt to answer that, you have to consider how complex large organizations can be and how that impacts on decision making. Because you see, at the very heart of this question, it's all about how we deal with scarcity. We don't have infinite people to deliver change. We don't have infinite time. So on one hand, you've got a limited amount of time and a limited number of people. On the other hand, you have an organization with various strategic goals that need to be delivered and a multitude of possible projects that they could all generate. A simple first step could be to eliminate anything that's obviously unhelpful. We'd need to align all the potential projects with at least one of the strategic goals and be able to demonstrate that it's going to move the organization closer towards achieving its strategy. And any projects that aren't able to be aligned are just eliminated. But that still leaves a lot. And we're only slightly closer to deciding which should be delivered first. And that's not even considering the existing projects that are currently being delivered, which really makes things interesting because any day one of them could be completed or could be cancelled, freeing up resources. And what would those resources be assigned to work on next if you haven't prioritized your work? We need to prioritize the pipeline. So basically, we need to find some way to prioritize projects in a way that the most senior people in an organization can agree to. I remember the first time I attempted this. I read this book, Management of Portfolios. It's very good. And if you're involved in portfolio management, then it's a great idea to get yourself a copy. I came up with some criteria to assess the projects on. I weighed up that criteria so some items were more important than others. I created a calculator in Excel, passed it over to the business partners that interfaced with the heads of the various business units and asked them to go and populate it. And they outright rejected it. I thought to myself, it's not too complicated. It was less than 10 simple questions. It's not like this was going to take a lot of time per project. But no, they said, we're not doing it. They said they'd rather take the list of projects back to the heads and come back with a single prioritized list. I didn't let this hurt my feelings. I wasn't at all precious about the calculator, but I was suspicious about how they could possibly come back with an outcome that would be fairer than one generated by a calculator. Well, I said fine and waited to see what they'd come back with, and the outcome didn't disappoint. One business partner only had 2 projects on their list, one of which was already in flight and being delivered. That was ranked as number 1. The next one was ranked as number 2. Another business partner came back with 10 items on their list, of which 6 were prioritized as number 1 and the rest were number 2. The others were similar. So I said, that's great. You've got 4 lists of projects you've prioritized and only 1 delivery team. So which of your many projects goes first? They said, we thought about that. We'd keep the lists separate and then we'd take turns. So the idea was Team A's top priority would go first, then Team B's, then Team C's, then Team D's, and then back to Team A. I said, what happens if by the time it's Team C's turn, Team A has got a much greater opportunity available to them? They said, we'll deal with that at the time, and kicked the prioritization can right down the road. But with time I learned that this is not an easy task. Not just because it's hard to make a decision or because we try to ignore the impact of political power by influential board members on the selection process, but even with the best people and the most standardized data, it's still difficult to decide. So I've decided I need to get the view of a portfolio prioritization expert, and luckily, I happen to know one of the best. Stuart Easton is the founder of Transparent Choice. When he's not traveling around the world giving lectures on portfolio prioritization, he's developing new tools to help guide boards to correctly order their project pipelines. So I asked him, how do effective organizations decide which project should go next when resources are limited?
The real challenge is that, obviously the answer is you should be working on the stuff that adds the most value. But the problem is in a complex organization, which if you're hiring professional project managers, you're probably a complex organization, right? So in a complex organization, the problem is that if you put 5 executives in a room and you ask them, what's the most important thing for us to be working on? You'll probably get 8 or 9 different answers from those 5 people. And then ask them tomorrow and you'll get another 5 or 6 answers, right? So totally different. That's the problem, right? It's not that people don't understand that you have to align resources with what's important. It's that powerful people don't agree on what's important. And so the effect of that is that then they start jumping up and down and shouting at you to do my project now, right? So then as a project delivery organization, you're sitting there going, I really don't know what I need to be working on, because that really important person's shouting at me to do this, and that important person's shouting at me to do that. So I don't know what to work on. And so what we all try and do is we try and keep them all happy. So then we start trying to do too many projects all at once. And that will absolutely destroy your ability to effectively implement projects. Right? So when you're task switching between projects, I was looking at some research from the American Psychology Association, somebody like that, the other day, and they reckon 30 to 40% of your capacity just gets chewed up in task switching, right? When you're doing something like this, so you're taking 30% of your resources effectively and just throwing them away because you're not aligning with the goals of the organization. So, but the challenge is you need to get your leadership aligned on what those goals are and what those drivers are before you can align your portfolio. There's actually a lot of decision science looking at this, because this isn't a project management problem. This is a decision management problem, right? It's about how do we make the decision. And, I'm always astonished how few organizations actually have a formal process with a formal group of people who meet and have the authority to make this decision on what should we be working on, right? So step number 1, get yourself some kind of decision board. You can use the governance word if you like, but you need some kind of group of people who have the authority to make that decision. First is the first step. And then you need a formal process within that to get those people aligned on what the goals are. And then use those, score your projects effectively against those goals. Your business goals become criteria, and you score the projects. Often people will then just jump in and say, oh, I'll build a magic spreadsheet. The decision science kind of suggests that doesn't work terribly well. So there are methodologies out there that work a lot better. The one that, in my view, not just my view, there's research papers into this stuff, but the one that comes out kind of on top is something called AHP, Analytic Hierarchy Process. And it's really just a way of structuring the conversation that's designed to really get people to buy in, to really think carefully about the questions. And, it's not terribly difficult, but it's absolutely worth doing because it gets your leadership team aligned. Once they're aligned, aligning the portfolio becomes really easy because you just score projects against those criteria.
I wanted to get Stuart's thoughts on what criteria should apply to this decision making.
So the first thing, the question about what criteria you should use is a really good one. And sometimes we come across people who say, these are the criteria you should use, right? So I'm going to name check Gartner, not because they're particularly bad, but because they're probably one of the better known ones. But over the years, they've published lots of frameworks that say you should use these criteria. Again, here's what the research tells us. Do not take criteria off the shelf and use them. It will fail. They will not fit your business, and you will not get the results you want. You will not get the buy-in to the scoring model, and it will go horribly, horribly wrong. Your criteria are your criteria, and you need to go through a process to develop them. Having said that, they typically fall into a half dozen or so categories. So there's usually kind of short-term goals, revenue, stuff like that, right? Longer term goals, we want to break into the European market. You'll have kind of stakeholder centric goals. So that would be things like environmental impact, or impact on society or something like that, or employees, employee motivation, things like that. Then you've got risk. Two forms of risk typically come in here. One form is the obvious one when you're talking about projects, which is the risk of the project failing. And then the other one is systemic risk in the business, right? So if we don't do this project, what bad things happen, right? So the obvious one is, there's a new law, and people talk about, this project's mandatory. Actually, yes, there's a law, but not complying with the law is an option, right? But it introduces risk into the business. So that kind of systemic risk, the risk of something bad happening if we don't do this project, that's usually, that can be one of the criteria. So it's usually those kinds of buckets that they come into. But within those buckets, it's got to reflect your business. Don't be tempted. If a consultant ever walks through the door and says, "Have I got some criteria for you?" Right? If they ever do that, show them the door really quickly, because they do not know what they're talking about.
I wanted to know if we should ever stop existing projects if a new and better proposition comes along, and how we can prevent ourselves from flip-flopping so much that we end up wasting a lot of time and money.
Let's start off with one of the most famous decision biases out there, which is the sunk cost trap. Right? So this is where you say, we've spent $3 million on this. It's only going to cost us another $6 million to finish it. We can't give up that 3. That's wrong thinking, right? The question is, from this point today, what is the best way for us to invest our people, resources, time, money, all that kind of stuff? What's going to deliver the most value? So if you've got a project that you start it and you suddenly realize that actually this is 3 times bigger than we thought, it's irrelevant that you've already spent $10 million on it. What matters is how much more do you need to spend, and is that a good use of your time? And so what we talk about doing is using this, keeping this prioritization process as part of your regular governance process, right? So it's not a once a year thing. It's not a thing where you're saying, "Oh, let's go and kill this project. Let's start a campaign." Because as soon as you do that, the executive who asked for that project is going to come after you, right? So, and they're going to resist you. They're going to fight you. But if you have a really clear data-driven prioritization process, and you're looking at every project in terms of value for money, then if a project is tracking as it should, right, the value that you're going to get from that project will stay the same, but the amount of work remaining will go down, right? So the value for money, right, so the value divided by how much you're going to spend will go up, right? So your projects over the lifetime should become better and better and better value for money. And that's why you really need to use a methodology like AHP or something similar to that, that consciously, deliberately, step by step, builds buy-in to the prioritization process. Because if you don't, when you put the big chart on the wall, they're going to say, "Yeah, but your data's wrong." And then you're back to executives fighting you to kill projects. So yes, you should kill them. You should do that using data, using value for money. Don't fall into the sunk cost trap. You asked one final bit, and I've left that to the end because this is the hardest bit. How do you stop then just jumping from one project and never actually finishing anything? And the answer to that really is, if you're in that position, then you actually need to take a look at your project intake process. Because if you're in that position, that means that there is something, you're doing something wrong when you're assessing those projects. Right? You're not assessing the risk of the project properly, or you're not planning it properly, or you're not doing something at the intake stage of the project. And if you fix that, then you won't have that jumping problem, right? So the jumping problem is a symptom of something earlier in the process.
In that situation when you're talking about being data-driven, I can imagine if the product that's in flight at the moment is somehow disappointing, and you got a better prospect and you think, well, this is going to make sense. Like, this one's not going to achieve what we thought it was going to do. There's plenty of projects that have that happen. How about if it is delivering what's expected, but what it's going to deliver was a modest return compared to, you can move your project manager onto something that's going to have a greater return? Does it still make sense in that situation to say, you know what, we were still going to bag this and we're like 6 months away from doing it, but this is going to be 3 years, but it's more tempting.
Again, this is where you've got to think about the balance, right? So something that you're a month away from delivering versus something that's 3 years away from delivering, crack on, finish it, and then start your 3-year project, right? Because getting some value, you don't get any points for any project unless you complete it, roll it into BAU, and then get it embedded as a change in the way BAU works, right? It's not enough to deliver the project, right? You don't get points for that either. It has to be adopted by the business and actually deliver some benefits, right? So that's the only time you get points. So if you're looking at that 3-year project, the one that's 3 years out, but you've just spent 9 months and you're almost there. It's often, again, if you look at the value for money, if you look at just the value side of that equation, the 3-year one probably looks more attractive. But if you look at value for the money that you need to spend to release that value, right? Because you've only got 1 month of spend left, the value for money is actually a lot higher on that short one than you'd expect. So this is very similar if you've come across Waiter's Shortest Job First in Agile, right? It's a similar sort of concept where you're kind of looking at it's kind of a weighted value model, if you like, a time-weighted value model or a cost investment-weighted value model that you're looking at to make these decisions. There's a little bit of artistry, there's a little bit of politics sometimes involved in this, but fundamentally it comes down to the numbers, right? So I'm going to get 2 units of value from this project, 10 units of value from this project. You would think this one's better. But if you only have to put in 1 unit of work to finish this project and 100 units of work to finish that project, right, this one's better. Just from a value for money point of view, that's the better investment.
Thank you ever so much. Stuart's details and Transparent Choices details are in the description of this video. The focus of this video has been on portfolio management, which is one of the main functions of a portfolio level PMO. In case you're wondering what a PMO is and what they do, then check out this video next, where I ask Lindsay Scott from the House of PMO, what is a PMO?